There's a quiet kind of power in choosing to live alone, not because you're avoiding connection or because love has failed you, but because you've learned the sacredness of being whole by yourself. We live in a world that romanticizes relationships as the pinnacle of happiness. But here's the truth most don't say out loud. Many people in relationships feel lonelier than those who sleep in beds they chose for themselves. Living alone isn't about isolation. It's about sovereignty. It's about reclaiming your emotional space, your time, your dreams without compromise. Living alone doesn't mean you've given up on intimacy. It means you've chosen to build the most important one first, the relationship with yourself. The one where you stop walking on eggshells, the one where you listen when your body says rest, and you trust it when your heart says no. The one where your joy doesn't need permission. When you live alone, there's no one else around to constantly validate your choices, redirect your doubt, or cushion your mistakes. That can feel intimidating at first because for so long, many of us have learned to lean on others to confirm that we're doing life right. But in solitude, something extraordinary begins to unfold. You become your own source of guidance. You start to realize that your inner voice, once drowned out by noise, expectations, or fear, is wiser than you thought. The more you listen to it, the more you recognize its clarity. Whether it's choosing what to eat, what career step to take, or whether to walk away from something that no longer serves you, you begin to trust that your instincts aren't flawed. They were just silenced. You don't need to second guess yourself when there's no one offering an alternate opinion every 5 minutes. You make decisions based on your own needs and values, and when those decisions lead to success, even in small ways, your confidence grows. And when they don't, you learn. And you heal, and you do it without shame, because there's no one keeping score. Living alone creates a relationship with yourself that's rooted in self-reliance. You realize that you can make hard choices, you can weather emotional storms, you can hold your own hand through uncertainty and still come out on the other side standing tall. Trusting yourself becomes less about knowing all the answers and more about knowing that you will show up for yourself again and again with compassion, courage, and clarity. That kind of trust, it's not just powerful, it's unbreakable. When you live alone, emotional clarity becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Without the constant emotional noise of another person's moods, projections, or needs in your space, you start to hear yourself more clearly, and that is the beginning of something profoundly healing. In many relationships, especially ones that are codependent or imbalanced, your emotions can get tangled in someone else's. You might feel anxious and not know if it's really your anxiety or theirs. You might feel guilt that isn't truly yours to carry. But when you live alone, those emotional distortions begin to dissolve. You're finally able to ask, what am I really feeling right now? And get an honest answer. Solitude gives you the space to unpack your emotions without judgment. There's no pressure to downplay your sadness, to perform happiness, or to be okay for someone else's comfort. You don't have to explain your tears. You don't have to justify your joy. You simply get to feel fully, authentically, and on your own timeline. This emotional clarity allows you to spot your triggers with gentleness instead of shame. You can notice what makes your chest tighten, what brings you peace, what patterns you're still holding onto from the past. It becomes easier to reflect, to journal, to meditate, and to be still with what's rising to the surface, because no one is rushing you to move on or calm down. You start to distinguish between what's real and what's a reaction. You understand the roots of your emotional responses, and most importantly, you learn how to regulate your emotions with kindness instead of suppression. Living alone becomes a mirror, not a distorted one built by someone else's perceptions, but a clean, steady one that reflects who you really are. You begin to see your emotional landscape with more compassion. You start recognizing your boundaries, honoring your needs, and naming your truth without fear. And from that clarity comes resilience, because when you truly know your emotional world, you stop being at the mercy of it, and you stop letting others dictate how you feel. Emotional clarity isn't just about peace, it's about power. The quiet, grounded kind that says, I know what I feel, I know what I need, and I trust myself to respond with grace. There is something sacred about knowing that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. When you live alone, you reclaim that sacredness. You become the sole guardian of your environment, your energy, and your emotional safety. And that kind of peace, it's not just comforting, it's transformational. In many relationships, even the well-intentioned ones, peace can become a fragile thing. One wrong tone, one unresolved conflict, or one emotional outburst from the other person can shatter the quiet you were trying to hold on to. You start tiptoeing around moods. You begin anticipating reactions. And without even realizing it, you're managing someone else's emotional state just to preserve the illusion of harmony. But when you live alone, that emotional tightrope disappears. You no longer have to compromise your calm to accommodate someone else's chaos. You don't have to absorb energy that isn't yours. You don't have to explain why you need silence or justify why you're not in the mood to talk. The space is yours, and the stillness within it becomes your sanctuary. You learn how to regulate your own nervous system without being thrown off by someone else's triggers. You discover how powerful it is to go an entire day without tension, without misunderstanding, without walking on eggshells. And when something does disrupt your peace, whether it's an outside stressor, a memory, or a moment of grief, you get to respond in your own time, in your own way, without interference or pressure. Your peace becomes a non-negotiable boundary. You start designing your days around what restores you, not what drains you. You create rituals that ground you. Your morning coffee in silence, music that lifts your spirit, slow evenings without constant noise. These small, steady moments become your medicine. And here's the deeper truth. When no one else has the power to disturb your inner world, you become unshakable. You stop giving people access to your nervous system just because they're familiar. You stop confusing chaos with connection, and you realize, sometimes for the first time, that peace is not something you find in others. It's something you protect within yourself. Living alone teaches you that true peace doesn't come from control. It comes from alignment, from knowing who you are, what you need, and refusing to sacrifice it for temporary company. Because when you've tasted real peace, anything that threatens it starts to feel like a betrayal. And you no longer allow anyone, not a partner, not a friend, not even your past, to have that kind of control over your life. Living alone doesn't mean giving up on love. It means preparing for it in its most authentic, nourishing, and sacred form. When you choose solitude with intention, you're not closing yourself off from connection. You're building the inner architecture required to sustain something real, something that doesn't erode your identity but expands your soul. Too often, we enter relationships from a place of emotional hunger. We want someone to fill the silence, to soften our insecurities, to prove we are worthy. But when we haven't taken the time to meet ourselves fully, to sit with our shadows, and to hold our own heart in its most raw state, we enter love with a deficit. And deficits always demand, they need constant reassurance, endless compromise, and unspoken expectations that slowly turn love into performance. But when you live alone, and not just physically, but emotionally, you begin to build something different. You cultivate inner abundance. You become the person who knows how to be alone on a Friday night without collapsing into loneliness. You become someone who can hold space for their own joy and pain without outsourcing it to someone else. So you learn to love yourself in the quiet moments, to cook for yourself like company's coming, to dress in a way that pleases your own reflection. You begin to realize that your life is already full, not because of another person, but because you've filled it with meaning, care, intention, and truth. From that fullness, deeper love becomes possible, not the kind that clings or chases, but the kind that flows and honors. You stop settling for relationships that disrupt your peace, and you stop romanticizing potential. You want something that mirrors the balance you've already created. You no longer need someone, you choose someone, and that distinction makes all the difference. And you also learn how to communicate better. Because when you've had time to sit with your emotions, understand your triggers, and set clear boundaries, you bring that emotional intelligence into partnership. You're no longer afraid of speaking your needs because you've spent enough time honoring them on your own. You don't avoid hard conversations because you've already faced hard truths in solitude. Most importantly, you love with a sense of freedom, not fear. You're not clinging to someone to avoid yourself. You're standing beside them because it aligns with the peace and wholeness you've already built. And if that love asks you to abandon yourself again, you now have the strength to walk away. Living alone lays the foundation for deeper love because it teaches you the most essential truth. Love is not about completing each other. It's about meeting as two whole beings, unafraid of silence, unafraid of solitude, and ready to build something sacred from a place of inner richness. One of the most liberating truths about living alone is this: your evolution is no longer delayed by someone else's resistance. You no longer have to dim your light to keep another person comfortable. You no longer have to hold your breath while someone catches up. Your growth is yours now, uninterrupted, unapologetic, and unbound. In many relationships, especially ones that lack emotional maturity or alignment, growth becomes a negotiation. You start to second guess your desire to evolve because you don't want to leave them behind. You downplay your dreams to avoid intimidating them. You avoid uncomfortable truths to keep the peace. And over time, you shrink, not because you're incapable, but because the relationship requires you to stay small to survive. But when you live alone, there's no one tugging on your sleeve, asking you to slow down so they don't feel inadequate. There's no one dismissing your ambitions or minimizing your healing journey. There's no guilt tripping when you want to take a class, start therapy, or change your entire life. You begin to move at the pace of your own becoming. You read what expands you. You meditate without judgment. You challenge your own limiting beliefs. You build habits that nourish your mind, body, and soul without having to explain why you're changing. Growth no longer feels like a threat. It feels like home. And when setbacks happen, and they will, You don't have someone projecting their fear or discouragement onto you. You learn to encourage yourself. You learn that failure isn't shameful, it's part of the process, and you don't have to defend that truth to anyone. This freedom allows you to take creative risks, to explore versions of yourself you never had room for, to change your mind, to reinvent your life as many times as needed, because no one's identity is entangled with yours. You are no longer carrying someone else's unprocessed pain while trying to heal your own. Living alone reveals how much energy you were spending managing other people's discomfort with your growth. Once you reclaim that energy, you become unstoppable. You write, you build, you heal, you move forward, not because someone pushed you, but because you chose it. You also start seeing relationships through a new lens. You're no longer drawn to people who need rescuing, fixing, or convincing. You want someone who is walking their own path of growth so you can walk beside each other, not pull each other. And maybe most importantly, you stop apologizing for wanting more. More peace, more healing, more clarity, more depth. Living alone teaches you that your potential was never too much. It was just never meant to be caged by someone else's limits. Now you get to expand as wide as your soul will allow, without permission, without fear, and without delay. There comes a moment in solitude, not dramatic or loud, but deeply quiet, when you look around at the life you've created for yourself and you feel something rare, contentment. Not the fleeting kind that depends on attention or validation, but the steady, grounded joy that comes from truly liking the life you live. That's when you know you've fallen in love with your own life. Living alone teaches you to savor the seemingly insignificant moments, the ones we often overlook in the rush of routine or the chaos of a shared life. You begin to find magic in the morning light pouring through your window. You create rituals out of everyday tasks, playing your favorite music while you cook, taking long baths without being rushed, dancing around your apartment just because you can. You decorate your space in a way that reflects you, not a compromise of tastes. Everything becomes an expression of your inner world, not an accommodation of someone else's needs. You start doing things not because they impress anyone, but because they feed your spirit. You try new recipes, visit places alone, read late into the night, learn new skills, rearrange your furniture just to feel something fresh. And you discover that you don't need an audience to feel alive. You just need your own full presence. Without the distractions of a relationship constantly pulling you outward, you begin to live inward out. Your life becomes a mirror of your values, your joys, your rhythm. You wake up when you want. You work the way that suits your energy. You rest without guilt. You explore without asking for permission. And suddenly, your life starts to feel like yours in a way it never quite did before. You also begin to see yourself more clearly. You notice what lights you up and what dims you. You learn how to meet your own emotional needs. You build a self-trust so strong that loneliness becomes rare because your own company feels like home. And then the most beautiful thing happens. Your standards rise, not out of pride, but out of love. Because once you've fallen in love with your own life, you're no longer willing to invite in anything or anyone that disrupts that harmony. You no longer chase love just for the sake of not being alone. You no longer settle for half-hearted effort or emotional immaturity. You know now what fulfillment feels like. And you know that any relationship worth your time must add to your life, not distract you from.